think it's pretty
Do I
good.
look okay?
Yeah, you look great. Especially for your age, you look wonderful.
So, we were just having the conversation about your father passing away at a young age and how that impacted you. So, would you want to share a bit about that process for you?
Well, I think probably one of the most significant events in my life was to lose my father when I was only 12 years old. It was in the middle of the Depression, 1933. On June the 14th, Dad was taken from us. He'd been sick for quite a while. And I remember Mother called us in and had us kids come up to his bed and say goodbye. It was in the middle of the night.
Wow.
And the next morning, my mother gathered us around the table and explained the situation. And she told us then, she says, we're going to depend on Jesus to take care of us. And she refused to take any kind of aid, welfare. She was confident the Lord would provide. And my part of it was that at 12 years old, I got my first job. My first job was delivering milk. Got up at 4:30 every morning and got on this milk truck and carried the bottles of milk from the truck to the houses. And that was my beginning. This is during this summer. It worked pretty well. And so the impact was, I think I grew up much faster, quicker than a lot of kids did, and certainly it instilled in me a responsibility.
Yeah. What were so with your parents, they both impacted you even before you lost your dad, their history with their own faith. Can you tell us more about that?
My parents were an interesting combination. Although we were all Mennonites, my mother came from one strain of Mennonites and my dad from another. My mother's strain was the General Conference of Mennonites, and it was sort of inclined more to professionalism, to business, that type. My dad, on the other hand, came from the Mennonite Brethren, and it was primarily agricultural. And these two strains came together in our family. And it was only in recent years that I was able to recognize the impact of those two strains had on the lives of my brother, my sister, and me.
That's amazing. And so you had shared that each of you actually got an education, right? And because your parents did. So what did your parents do, and what did you do?
One of the interesting things was that my parents were outliers in the sense that way back in the first part of this last century, they both went to college. My mother is a graduate of Biola, and my dad graduated from Moody Bible Institute. And so, which was an uncommon practice, especially among Mennonites. And I think it was that influence that encouraged my brother and my sister and myself not only to go through college, but all of us received our masters. Wow. And felt that it was something that we could pass along to our own kids, which we've seen duplicated.
Right. That's amazing. Was there anything like that your mom, specifically after your father passed away, like things that she taught you that you still remember or that you feel like have impacted you specifically?
Well, I think the big thing that Mother left with us was her trust in God. The confidence she had that God would take care of us even though we had nothing. I've often said my dad died leaving us with more debts than dollars. And I remember one of the things that I was charged with doing was every month taking $20 to a couple of ladies who would loan my dad and mother, I think it was $200. And after Dad died, I remember going across town with that $20 bill to pay on that debt until it was completed. And I think those things have certainly impacted how I look on life and the whole concept of responsibility.
I love that. That's really special. Okay. There's so many questions we could go into. You had shared that one of the things that you decided about your path in life was that you never wanted to embarrass your mom. And how did that impact your decision making as you grew older?
I think one of the things that I purposed or proposed in my own life when I started getting involved in friendships and getting out into the world, that I never wanted to do anything that would embarrass my mother. And I felt that that was an important characteristic or concern, and it certainly followed me through my entire life. Even at this point, I still remember that pledge that I made.
It's amazing. Was there a moment when you chose to follow Jesus? Like when you became aware of that? Even though your mom gave you that really strong foundation, both your parents, do you have a moment when you kind of realized Jesus is real and this is what I want for my life? Like what was that like for you?
Well, that year that my dad died, 1933, was very significant. In fact, losing him, getting my first job, that sense of responsibility, and about 2 months after Dad died, I accepted Christ as my Savior. I was 12 years old, September the 1st, 1933, at a tent meeting. I said yes. I opened the door of my heart and let Jesus come in. And that has governed me or controlled me or directed me throughout my entire life.
Wow.
It was later on that after I had finished high school, it was our custom in the Mennonite church to go to Bible school for a year, which I did locally. And after that, I enrolled at the junior college in our community, hoping to get enough of an education to be able to support my mother adequately. And I felt that I probably should go into accounting, and I started a course along that route. And it was after that first year in college, there were two gentlemen in the community, not related to me. One was a teacher, the other was the director of the local YMCA, and they took an interest in me, and they sponsored me, sending me to Mount Hermon for 1 week at the youth camp. So I went, and it was a very significant event in my life because it was there that I sensed the Lord calling me into ministry. And I came home confident that that's what the Lord wanted. This ran into conflict with my major that I was following because I wanted to do something to earn a living, and all of a sudden God was calling me into serving Him. And how was I going to reconcile this? I had this responsibility with my mother, and I had this calling from the Lord. Well, my mother encouraged me to follow the Lord, to go into ministry. And consequently, I changed my major. I was blessed to spend my junior year of college at Wheaton, and that was a wonderful experience. And I happened to be in the same class as Billy Graham, and so he was sort of a friend for the rest of my life. But I finished that first year of college, and then another significant event took place, and that was the attack at Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
In 1941. And of course, the life of all of us young guys changed, because it was in 1942 we had to register for the draft, and then we were subject to being called. However, I was in a position where I was entitled to be able to continue my education with the purpose of becoming an Army chaplain. And I applied for that deferment. Unfortunately, the draft board under which I was registered didn't seem to have time or enough commitment to take care of my request, and it was delayed and delayed until it was too late for me to continue at Wheaton. I was home in California trying to determine what I should do next. I knew if I weren't in school, I would be drafted. So I had to figure out some way to get into school. Well, I hoped to go back to Wheaton, but finally I realized that was impossible. The classes had started back there, and I still didn't have my word that my deferment had come through. So finally one day I decided, told my mother, I'm going to just go to school someplace, and I think I might as well go up where my girlfriend is going to school at San Jose State. So I got into my car, my 1921 Model T, and drove up to San Jose. I got there Friday evening, and we spent the weekend together. Monday morning, I went to the registrar's office to register for class, and I was told that registrations had closed on Friday. So now what do? Well, I convinced Fern to go with me up to Berkeley to see if I could get into Cal. So we drove up to Berkeley. I had my transcripts with me, went into the registrar's office, told us to come back after lunch, went back, and I had been accepted. That's how I got into Berkeley.
Wow.
So I continued my studies at Berkeley and graduated from Berkeley in 1944.
And then how long did it take from your application to starting? Was it pretty quick? Like when you dropped your transcripts and applied to Berkeley, did they let you know pretty immediately that you were
2 hours.
What?
Yes,
Yeah.
I dropped off the transcripts about 11:30 in the morning, and the lady told me, go have lunch, and we'll have a word for you in the afternoon.
Wow.
I went back at 1:30 and I had been accepted.
It's very different from how it is now.
Blows your mind.
It blows your mind. It does.
All things are possible.
I love it.
Only believe.
It's a perfect segue to Fern. How did you meet, and what drew you to Fern?
Well, Fern was a very significant part of my whole life. When I was in junior college, actually my first year in junior college, I was invited to go to a retreat conducted by the Bible class or Bible study group we had at the college. So I went on this weekend retreat, there were quite a few of us. We went up in the school bus, and we got up into Sequoia Lake, and got there after dark. By the time we got there, it had started snowing, and we had to go up a trail to get to the lodge. And as I was going up the trail, a young lady fell down in front of me. I helped her get up and sort of helped her get up to the top of the hill. It was Fern. That's how we met. We spent that weekend together, and by the end of that week, we were holding hands, and that was the beginning of a beautiful life that lasted for 65 years.
So beautiful. Once you started getting to know Fern, what was it that made you want to continue dating her? What were her qualities?
Well, I sensed that she was on the same wavelength I was. She was a relatively new Christian, and when she knew that I was studying for the ministry, she was excited, because that seemed to be what she would like to be, a part of a ministry. I met Fern when I was in junior college, my second year of junior college. So I had 1 year to spend in college with her.
Okay, 1 year.
Then, after I graduated from the local junior college, I had the privilege of going to Wheaton College. So I went to Wheaton College and leaving Fern at home with the idea that I was going to continue my studies for the ministry. In January of that school year, I attended a chapel service at the college in which there was an appeal made for people to go to South America as missionaries. South America was considered at that time the neglected continent as far as missions was concerned. And I sensed the Lord calling me into missions. Now I had a dilemma. I had this girlfriend who was willing to be in ministry, but to ask her to go to the mission field, that's another story. It was our custom to write letters to each other every day. And of course we didn't have telephones or anything like that in those days. So that night I went home and wrote my letter. I told Fern exactly what had happened and expressed my concern that maybe this would be difficult for her, but this is what I sensed God was calling me to do. I sent my letter and then waited to see what the answer was going to be. Well, a few days later, I received a letter from Fern. She had written a letter almost the same time, and she told me, without knowing about my letter, she told me about an experience that she had had. She'd gone to a mission meeting in Fresno and heard a missionary speaker, and she felt God calling her into missions. Our letters crossed in the mail. Talk about confirmation. It still brings tears to my eyes. But God is so good.
It's powerful. I love that.
You can't outgive God. The more you give, the more you get. And that was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had. And that was the groundwork for, 60 years of ministry, serving the Lord together in the U.S. and in Ecuador and in Mexico. We had a wonderful life.
You ended up in Ecuador.
After I finished seminary, we were called by the Covenant Church and ordained. I was ordained and we were commissioned to go as missionaries to Ecuador. And We were originally scheduled to go to Colombia to get our language training, but the doors were closed due to a political situation in Colombia, and eventually we went directly to Quito, and a special school was set up for us and probably another dozen missionaries from other groups to learn language in Quito. And we spent our first 9 months studying language about 4 to 5 hours a day. And that was our beginning in Ecuador.
During that initial period in Ecuador, I'm going off script now. What was your favorite thing about that process of planting a church? What was your favorite part of developing a church in Quito? Like, what was it that gave you kind of the most joy, or yeah, like what was it? What was it you liked about that experience?
As I say, we spent our first 9 months studying the language, and I was very anxious to learn. I would get the newspaper every day and read it in Spanish, although I didn't understand it, but I was absorbing it, no doubt, and exercised the little bit of language I had. And in October of that year, we started making our first contacts in Ibarra, the town to which we were eventually going to be moving. We didn't actually move to Ibarra until March of 1950, which was a year and 3 months after we arrived in Ecuador. And the purpose was to start a church in that city.
In that process, like, what kind of made you come alive? Like, was it the plan? Because you had said to me the other day you loved thinking through the planning. So just sort of what about it for you, that you really thrived?
Well, one of the challenges in those days, especially when we got to the town of Ibarra, we were the first foreigners, Americans, in this city of about 12,000 people. A very closed, very Catholic, very traditional city. And here we were trying to plant a church. We also, because of through our contract with the government, we were obligated to start a school in that city, which we did. And so we began to share our faith, somewhat indirectly, through the school. But I had the privilege of knowing a group in Quito that was willing to help. And the way we began our ministry there was through a tent meeting. This group, a part of the radio station in Quito, had a large meeting tent, almost like a circus tent, but probably would seat 100 or 200 people. And we set up this tent in our large backyard. We didn't dare put it out on an open corner somewhere. So it was within the walled area of our mission place. And the benches were just planks of wood and set up on blocks or something. And we began a week of evangelistic meetings. We advertised it as much as we could in the community, not knowing what we would get. And we were blown away. We had over 100 people in attendance the first night in this tent meeting. And we continued the meetings for a week. But I remember that first night, after the evangelist had spoken, we'd had a chalk artist with a beautiful picture and probably a video of some kind. The speaker, Bob Savage, gave the invitation, and almost everybody in the audience raised their hand. They were interested in following Jesus. And then he said, well, those of you who are really interested, I'd like for you to come forward and take these front benches. And about 50 people came forward. And then he explained the plan of salvation more directly, and probably thinking, I got to get this thing, these people have to understand what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, finally, he got it down to where there were about 15 people who said yes, they wanted to accept the Lord. And that was the beginning of our first church in that community. We started a church with 16 people. And that church has grown now to multiply itself in that community, planted 4 other churches. Other groups have come in. I believe there are now 15 churches in that little town. The town has grown from about 12,000 to 150,000. And I was privileged to visit there and preach there a couple of years ago. And in fact, this morning I watched the morning service by YouTube, Facebook. So God is blessed, and now we have covenant churches throughout Ecuador. That was the first covenant church in all of South America. We have churches now in most of the countries of South America and all over the United States. So it's great to see something begin that's continuing to bloom and blossom today.
What does it feel like for you knowing that you were there in the beginning? Like, how does that feel for you when you think on it?
You know, it's interesting when you look back over your life and you realize there were so many little things that came together, and when you start out, you don't know what it's going to be. It's like planting a tree. You plant a tree, it might be 4, 5, 6 feet tall, but if you live long enough, you'll see that tree maybe is 80 or 100 feet tall. And I think it's the same too. It's same also with the gospel. You plant the seed, that's your responsibility. God takes care of the growth, and it's not up to you to make it grow. You just let it grow and let God do His thing. But it's that faithfulness of planting the seed of, you don't even have to do a lot of the cultivation, although there that enters in it. But it's that planting of the seed which is the most important aspect. And Ferd and I had the privilege of planting 3 churches in Ecuador. Later on, we went to Mexico. We had planted 3 more churches there. And it's a blessing today to see what God has done through that little bit of one seed. Ecuador, 1 church is now over 100 churches. And the last figure I had, there's like 16,000 people worshiping every Sunday. And here I am, able to appreciate what it meant to plant that seed. It was interesting. And when I started preaching, I'd only studied the language for about 10 months. And I started preaching. It wasn't very good. And often the people in the audience would give me the word that I was trying to come up with. But, you don't wait till you're perfect. You just plant the seed, and God blesses. He takes it and makes it grow. You don't.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of something you shared at Brian and I's wedding about your decision to change countries or to go to Mexico. Would you mind telling me the story of that process with you and Fern specifically?
Well, I've had a very varied life. We spent our first 17 years of ministry in Ecuador. By that time, we had 4 children, and we felt that it was probably advisable for us and the well-being of our family to maybe spend a few years in the United States to get our kids acculturated and get squared away so they could continue studies in college. So we came home after 17 years in Ecuador, and, not knowing exactly what we were going to be doing. We assumed that we would at least make our headquarters in our home area of California. On our way home from Ecuador, we went through Chicago, which is the headquarters for our mission, sort of a debriefing session and contacts and so forth. And while we were there, we were invited to go out to dinner with a man who, with his wife, had visited us in Ecuador quite a few years before, and who had become quite interested in what we were doing. We went to this dinner. After the dinner, he looks at me and he says, "Well, what are you going to do, Marlan, now that you're home?" I says, "I don't know. I have no idea. I'm sure that the Lord will guide." And he looked at me and he says, "How would you like to run one of our retirement homes?" He says, "We've got a vacancy in Miami and we've got a brand new one in San Diego." I said, "I would love it." Fern said, "No way. I don't want to be around old people that are dying all the time." He says, "Well, I would suggest that when you head to California, you check out with the head of the board out there about the possibility of working at Mount Miguel Covenant Village in San Diego." So I did. Well, it took us, he happened to be on vacation. It was at least 2 weeks before I could make contact. When I finally reached him, Paul Larson, I asked him when it would be convenient to get together with him to talk about the possibilities at the village. He says, "There's no need for us to get together. We've already hired you." I said, "Wow." So it was a short time after that, I moved to San Diego, began my ministry at the retirement community, the brand new retirement community in San Diego. A month later, Fern and the family joined me, and we had the privilege of starting again something brand new. It was a beautiful facility with only 3 people, and the commission was to fill the building. Well, I did. I was there for a total of 7 years. I added 5 more buildings while I was there. The attendance or the residency went from 3 to 80, and finally I was sensing that the Lord was speaking to me about the possibility of going back to missions, and about the same time the leadership felt that it was probably time for me to move to another location, and give me some new opportunities. And rather than accept that challenge, I told him that I sensed the Lord was calling me to missions again. Well, I told Fern that I wanted to go back to the mission field. She says, no way, I don't want to leave my daughters here. They're not married. I just don't feel like I want to go. And I says, well, let me do this. I'll write the mission board, and if there is an opportunity, then we'll consider it. If there isn't, if the door's closed, then we'll know. So I wrote a letter to Chicago telling me about my availability, and I got a letter back immediately, within a couple of days. Yes, will you please go to Mexico City and start a church there? I said, wow, I've always wanted to go to Mexico in the first place. Now I'm going. Fern was very reluctant, but she did say yes. And we went to Mexico. And that's another whole story.
You had shared that when she was at the end of her life, you had shared a story about the end of her life and her reflections about this process you were just in.
Yeah, we went to Ecuador, to Mexico City. We only actually in Mexico City for 6 years, but during that time we were able to plant 3 more churches and make a lot of friends, and Mexico became a very real and vital part of our whole life experience. Many years later, Fern was now 82 years old. She was on her deathbed, and our youngest daughter, Jan, was with her on a Sunday morning before she died, and she talked to her mother and says, Mom, you had so many wonderful experiences. What was the most significant of all of them? She could hardly speak. She said, Mexico. The thing that she hated the worst became the greatest blessing. And it was such an affirmation of how the Lord leads. We don't understand. And sometimes we're fighting and kicking. But if we give in and go with the Lord, that's where the blessing is. What a way to end a life, rejoicing in what the Lord has done. A few days later, she was gone.
So thinking about your kids, and then, like you said, you've got grandkids, great-grandkids, great-great-grandkids. What would be some advice or some wisdom that you want them to hear from you? Because especially the littlest ones, are too little to right now to be able to fully hear it, but hopefully through this, they'll be able to get your wisdom, when they're old enough to hear it.
Well, I would say, like I said when I was a teenager, don't do anything that'll embarrass your mother. Remember, you're writing your life history by how you act. And be sure you have good words on a clean page.
The advice of whose you are and who you are, did you guys come up with that, or did you hear that from someone? You came up with that.
I think so. I
Great.
don't remember hearing it.
Marlan N's trademark.
No, I wouldn't say that.
It is. It's so good.
But I probably heard it from someone. I know what I was going to say.
Okay.
The thing that guided me, I think, was when my mother gave me a specific verse when I was probably 17 or 18 years old. I don't remember. It was Psalm 37:5. Commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and He will bring it to pass. And I think if there's anything I could recommend to my kids or to anyone else, commit your way to the Lord. Put Lord first. Trust in Him, and He'll make it happen. So I like to say sometimes there are three kinds of people. Some people make it happen. Some people watch it happen. And some people say, what happened? So I hope that you're one of those who make it happen. Do something positive, and don't just stand around and watch other people doing it, or be so dumb you don't even know what's going on.
I think this is an interesting question because of your initial response to it. So the question being, do you have any regrets?
I don't feel that I have any regrets at all. I feel like I lived every day to bring honor and glory to the Lord. I probably have made some mistakes, but I don't even think about those.
So you feel like you don't have any regrets because you lived each day trying to honor God.
I made mistakes, but I choose not to dwell on the negative. I'm a very positive person, and I can't think of anything where I really, I don't remember. I know I've made mistakes, but I just sort of put them out of my mind and maybe learn from them and move forward.
I think that's great. That's a great perspective. What are you most grateful for?
I guess the health that I've enjoyed, the privilege to be able to be around, to see my kids grow up, grandkids, great-grandkids, and now great-great-grandkids. It's probably one of my biggest joys. I guess one of my sorrows is that my wife didn't make it. She couldn't enjoy this, but the Lord has certainly blessed me to see how God has not only given me children, but to see my testimony reflected in their lives, and that they're all following the Lord. That's probably the biggest heritage I have. And then I guess also probably to see some of the results of the ministry. I mean, I think of Ecuador, watching the service this morning on FaceTime. What a blessing to see that church. That church is multiplied now, where there are over 100 churches. And this happens in my lifetime. At the village where I live, when I came, it was a blank slate. It was actually not blank, it was tumbleweeds and sagebrush with one building. I was able to build 5 buildings. We had 3 people. When I left, there were 80. Now there are close to 400. Covers 27 acres. And I've had the privilege of living there as a resident now for 31 years. So it's amazing how your life goes around and then you start reaping all the blessings. So that brings me to another point, and it is something that I would like to stress. One of the things that is distinctive about the village where I live is the landscaping. As I say, when I arrived there, it was a blank slate covered with tumbleweeds and sagebrush. And one of my first concerns was to get this place landscaped. And so we did. We got a landscape architect. He contoured the land. We started planting trees. The first trees that I planted were probably 8-10 feet tall. Now they're like 80-90 feet. And the whole place has been covered with landscaping. It's beautiful. It's an oasis. And people come there from all over to enjoy the rest of their lives in this beautiful place. I've often told people, if you want to make a difference in life, plant something. Whether it's a church, whether it's a family, or if it's just a tree, go out and plant something. Somebody has said, anybody can count the seeds in an apple, but nobody can count the apples in one seed. So if you plant something and leave it up to the Lord, He'll bring the increase. I've seen it in my family. I've seen it in my ministry in Ecuador. That first seed that we planted now is probably multiplied, I don't know how many thousand times. But what a blessing. And now the Lord has given me this very special blessing of living long enough to see the results of those seeds that were planted. So if I have any advice to old people or young people, go plant something. It might just be a tree, but maybe it's planting the love of God in the life of one person and letting God multiply that seed.
Perfect. That's beautiful.
So go plant something.
Go plant something.
Yeah, it's interesting to be at this point in life. I've outlived, my dad died at 45, my mother died at 80. I had a couple of grandparents that lived into their 90s, but here I am, 101, still enjoying relatively good health, at least outwardly, and certainly able to enjoy life. But let's face it, you know that you're living on the edge, and any day can be the last day. So it gives you sort of a sharpening, but also I think it's more of a gratification that you can still see the fruits of your labor. I've often quoted what Jim Elliot said, one of the 5 martyrs in Ecuador. Happened while we were down there. We knew them well. Anyway, he said, when the time comes to die, be sure you don't have to do anything but die. And I've tried to live my life, my entire life. But now as I come to the end, it gets into a sharper focus. And you want to be sure the way you live your life is a life that you don't have to have any regrets about, and a life that brings honor and glory to God. And anything you can do is that can further that is, I think, what you should be doing. One of my greatest joys is serving others. Somebody has said that the greatest purpose in life is to be needed by one person. In other words, if there's somebody that you can help, somebody that you can guide, somebody that you can advise or counsel. That's the biggest blessing of all. And I just enjoy doing things for others. It brings so much joy into my life. And I'm anticipating being able to do that until the last moment. Yeah, I think that's probably been characteristic. It's my desire. And I can't do much anymore, but I can do some. And I know Mary Carolyn says, if you want to get something done, ask Marlan. But I think one of the biggest, you're not recording this.
I am.
Oh, you.
Marlan Uncensored.
Well, I'm enjoying my relationship with Mary Carolyn at this point in life. And I find it so gratifying to be there for her. I'm 15 years older. Right now I'm helping her learn how to use her new iPhone. I helped her with her computer. But it's just that, the joy that it gives me of being able to help somebody else, to serve someone else.